The centers of the Gaelic tribes, Mediolanum, Comum, Bergamum, Brixia, grew from collections of wooden houses to fenced cities of brick and stone. Mantua, a survival apparently of the Etruscan power, received new life. Wealthy Patavium and other towns, and the other towns of the Veneti, welcomed the conquerors from the Tiber as friends and kinsmen. The forests disappeared, the swamps were drained, a multitude of cities sprang up amid rich cornfields and vineyards. And when the rest of Italy, exhausted by war and by the disappearance of the smaller landowners, was ceasing to be a nurse of men and was fast becoming a land of pastures and pleasure grounds, the valley of the Po was in all the vigor of a new life. One of the characteristic features of the north of Italy at the present day is the density of its population and the number of cities it contains, as most of these centers of population were already in existence in the days of the later Roman Empire, and as the history of Lombardy is before all a history of separate city-states, it will be well here to enumerate the chief. Their geographical position, too, is important. Their history has often differed according as they lie in the level plain, or are set on hills, or nestle in mountain valleys. They may, therefore, be conveniently grouped into classes, as cities of the plain, the hill, or the mountain. Beginning with the first and most important class, we find on the west and to the north of the Po, Vercelli on its river, the Sesia, which descends from the spurs of Monte Rosa. About 14 miles to the northeast is Novara, the territory of which in later days ran up by the lake of Orta, to end below the Simplon range. 30 miles due east brings us to Milan, Mediolanum, the middle city, the old capital of the Insubrian Gauls. Later on, the seat of emperors of the West. At the time when Roman strength, though fading fast, was still able to offer a stout resistance to the barbarians. Throughout the Middle Ages, the political, as it is now the intellectual and commercial, center of North Italy. Its rival, Pavia, the champion of the Ghibellines, lies only 22 miles south of Milan, on the Ticino, not far from its junction with the Po. Some 18 miles from Pavia, and 20 miles to the southeast of Milan, is Lodi, whose name, but not whose site, brings us back to the old Laus Pompeia, which fell a victim in the year 1111 to the enmity of Milan. Beyond the Adda is Crema, a colony from Cremona, and about 20 miles to the southeast we come to the latter city, which lies on the Po, and was once the ruler of the district between that river and the Oglio. East of Cremona and distant 40 miles from it lies Mantua, surrounded by the waters of the Mincio, which here expands into lagoons. Here wanton Mincius winds along the meads and shades his happy banks with bending reeds. Still proceeding eastwards, we come to where many-domed Padua Proud stands among the winding streams of Brenta and Baciglione. This portion of Italy is broken by isolated hills. Verona on the rushing Adige, Vicenza, 30 miles east at the foot of the Monti Berici, and the small town of Este at the foot of the southernmost peak of the Colli Euganei, serve as a transition to the second class of cities, those of the hills, For, though not precisely hill towns, much of their territory is hilly, if not actually mountainous, a fact which has had considerable influence on their history. Still farther to the east is Treviso, which closes our enumeration of the cities of the plain north of the Po, for Udine and Aquileia scarcely come into the tale of the Lombard cities, and although Venice does so come in, yet she must stand alone, separate from all other communities, as the city of the sea. South of the Po, amidst the many streams into which the great river breaks up before seeking its rest in the Adriatic, is Ferrara, La Grandona del Po, about 47 miles south of Padua. Bologna, southwest of Ferrara, though in the plain, lies near to the range of the Apennines, to the summit of which its territory extended. Ferrara was not founded until 604 AD and was an outpost of the Exarchate of Ravenna against the Lombards. Strictly speaking, it and Bologna are in Romagna, the portion of the Roman province of Emilia, which was not conquered by the Lombards. The two cities are so closely connected with the rest of the Lombard cities that for convenience they may be included among their number. The main stream of the Po no longer flows by Ferrara. Modena, 23 miles to the northwest, Reggio, Parma, and Piacenza, all lying along the great Roman highway, the Via Emilia, while themselves cities of the plain, ruled over a large extent of mountainous country. Finally, Alessandria, youngest of all these cities, built by the Lombard League in 1168 to command the passes between Genoa and Piedmont and Lombardy, and to hold in check the feudal lords of Liguria and Montferrat, closes our survey of this group. Passing now to the second group, those towns which are either themselves built on heights or which lie in midst of hilly districts. We have first those situated around the upper waters of the Po and its affluents in the modern Piedmont. Turin, nowadays the most important of these, never played a very important part in the Middle Ages, a fact to be explained, no doubt, by the power of the feudal lords of the houses of Savoy and Montferrat, who held the hill country in the neighborhood, and to one or the other of whom it was generally subject. The city itself lies in the plain beside the Po, but close by, on the opposite side of the river, the hills of the Montferrat range rise abruptly. Chieri, near Turin, now quite a small town, was in the Middle Ages much more important than its neighbor. It lies among the hills of Montferrat. Cherasco and Alba on the Tanaro, Acqui on the Bormida, Asti on the southern edge of the Montferrat range, Tortona and Bobbio farther east, are all in the hill country, with the one exception of Asti. None of them ever attained to much importance or to any long-continued independence from outside control. Separated from this group by the width of the Lombard plain are Bergamo, situated on a hill at a height of 12,045 feet above the sea, and some 30 miles northeast of Milan, and Brescia. Another 30 miles to the east of this, both where the foothills of the Alps sink down into the plain. Their territories in the Middle Ages ran up to the ridges of the high Alps, which separate the Italians from the German-speaking peoples. Here, too, we must name Como, itself built on a piece of level ground on the shores of its lake, but surrounded on all sides by steep hills, which, with semi-alpine valleys between them, extend over almost the whole district subject to the city. To the east, in the Trevisan Mark, we have only the already mentioned Verona and Vicenza in this class. The cities lying well in among the mountains are but few in number and small in importance. Aosta and Ivrea, in the valley of the Doria Valtea, under the shadows of Monte Rosa and Mont Blanc. Susa in the deep valley leading up to the Monte Cenis, Trent among the mountains of South Tyrol, Feltre and Belluno on the upper waters of the Piave, are all that need be mentioned in this group. The cities mentioned in the above sketch of the geography of the basin of the Po are all that are of importance for the medieval history of the district, with places such as Concordia, Altinum, or Aquilea, once great and flourishing, but which had either perished utterly or sunk into obscurity under the successive waves of barbarian invasions. The historian of the Lombard cities has no concern. There are, however, some names of places lying beyond the watershed of the Po, which may be added here to make our list of city-states complete. The history of Genoa is at times closely bound up with that of Milan, and neither geographical limits nor the events of history mark Bologna from Imola and the other towns of Romagna, nor Ferrara from Ravenna, the town destined for all time by Dante as the spot where Po descends. Per aver pace coi seguaci sui, with all its followers in search of peace. Inferno. The subsequent pages will show the importance of a clear conception of the geography of Lombardy. Here may be pointed out the short distances from city to city, tending inevitably to intensify hostile feelings, and the differences in situation leading to a difference in the political life of each. The cities in the plain were on the whole the wealthiest and the most democratic. The hill cities were never able thoroughly to break the power of the feudal aristocracy, whose rock-perched castles studded all their territories. Those of Piedmont could never make head against the great feudal princes whose territories of mountain and valley hemmed them in on every side. Finally, the small mountain communities, poor and cut off by natural obstacles from all expansion, lived a life apart, except insofar as they followed the fortunes of some more powerful neighbor. The basin of the Po would seem to have been, during the later days of the Roman Empire, the most flourishing portion of the Italian peninsula. During the Republic, it had been to a certain extent a new land, offering a virgin soil to the settler, and to the cities which he founded, a power of rapid growth. Something like that which we now associate with the western states of America. In other parts of Italy already, in the time of Cicero and even earlier, large estates had eaten up the small proprietors, but this does not seem to have been the case in Cisalpine Gaul. The Roman conquest had meant in many provinces, notably in Samnium, the uprooting from the soil of the previous inhabitants, and although Roman colonists were sent to secure the conquered districts, their numbers do not seem to have been great enough to fill the gaps in the ranks of the land-owning population caused by war and confiscation. Hence, most of the land in south and central Italy fell into the hands of a few great senatorial families who cultivated their estates by slave labor to the ruin and gradual extinction of the small proprietor. North of the Apennines, however, the procedure of the conquerors was different. The gaps caused by war among the natives were filled by the settlement in the conquered districts of a vast number of small proprietors. The surviving natives were left in possession of a sufficient share of land. This was more especially the case in the lands south of the Po, occupied by the Senones and Boii. In the case of the Boii, half of their lands were distributed to Roman colonists in 197 BC. The other half was divided up amongst those of the former inhabitants who had escaped the sword. It is said that the limits of the farms allotted to the new colonists, of which the average extent was 4 or 5 acres, can be distinctly traced at the present day in the neighborhood of some of the Emilian towns, and especially between Bologna and Cesena in Romagna. Bologna, Cremona, and Piacenza being Latin colonies, the colonists received much larger allotments, about 30 acres each. Parma and Modena were colonies of Roman citizens. North of the Po, there was but little displacement of the original inhabitants. The Insubres in the great plain around Milan kept their lands. The Cenomani to the east of them had fought on the Roman side, and so secured themselves from all molestation. These Celtic tribes were largely a pastoral people. Their country was thinly peopled, covered with forests and marshes, and therefore offered great tracts of unoccupied land available for new settlers. That there were plenty of such, attracted by the fertility of the virgin soil, is shown by the rapidity with which the Celts adopted the Latin speech and civilization. In the land of the Veneti, there was no conquest. The natives submitted peacefully to the protecting power of Rome. Here, with increased security, prosperity rapidly increased. Batavium in the days of Strabo was, after Rome, the richest town in Italy, and although it may be doubted whether the 120,000 men capable of bearing arms ascribed to it by this writer should not be taken to refer in reality to the whole levy of the Veneti, yet this estimate shows the ideas that prevailed as to its wealth and resources. The foundation in BC 181 of Aquileia, with its 4,500 colonist families, must have still further increased the prosperity of this part of Italy. Moreover, Cisalpine Gaul escaped on the whole from the disasters that befell Samnium, Etruria, and parts of Latium during the wars of Marius and Sylla. Blalock estimates the population of Italy under Augustus at about 5.25 millions, of whom about 1/3 were to be found north of the Apennines, quoted by Salvioli, Stato e popolazione dell'Italia prima e dopo le invasioni barbariche. It is true that the province had its share of trouble during the conflicts that followed on the death of Caesar, but the misfortunes of Cremona and its unlucky neighbor Mantua were more felt by individuals than by the cities themselves, while Samnium was left a desert, and the 6,000 armed burghers of Praeneste were replaced by a handful of absentee landholders. In the valley of the Po, little seems to have happened, save that in some parts a change took place in the ownership of landed property, without any appreciable diminution of the number of inhabitants or of holdings. One fact is clear: the survival in this part of Italy of a large free population, long after the growth of large estates cultivated by slaves, had diminished the number of free men in the other districts of the peninsula. We learn from Pliny that, in 100 AD, the landlords of Cisalpine Gaul still worked with free labor. And on the whole, we may consider the condition of the whole basin of the Po in 400 AD as one of extreme prosperity. At any rate, compared with the state of the rest of Italy. But to Salvioli, for a contrary view, yet he admits, but see Salvioli, page 13, for a contrary view, yet he admits that Cisalpine Gaul was in a better condition than the rest of Italy. It was looked on as one of the most important portions of the empire. The excellent strategic position of Milan marked it out as the most suitable residence of the emperors who strove to hold in check the ever-increasing hosts of the barbarians.